Okay, so if you came to the talk yesterday, we talked a lot about the Emerald SDK and the tools it provides. And today, looks like I'm just going to be walking through the docs with you. I would be doing it in a terminal side, but obviously I got lots of technical difficulties today. So you can follow along on docs etcdevteam.com. So,
Are you not using the slides?
no, man. Don't get me started. Okay, so first thing you would do to get the Emerald CLI installed would be git clone and then npm link. And as of right now, it installs the wallet from source, so that might take a bit, but in the future we're going to do it per platform, so it doesn't take as long. It probably takes like 6 minutes or something right now to install it. Because it installs, like I said, the wallet from scratch, which is an Electron app that if anyone's done Electron, they know how long it takes to compile an app. So what does Emerald give you? Like I said yesterday, you get Emerald New, Emerald Wallet, Emerald Explorer, Emerald Test RPC, and Emerald Deploy. So how does that all come together? So to be able to make a new Dapp from our template, you'd make a new directory, then cd into it, and then you'd run Emerald New. And then what that does is, like underneath, it actually uses truffle boxes to grab that and put in the directory for you. And so this would be like your basic directory structure for what your Dapp would look like. Inside the contracts directory is 2 Solidity contracts. One is migration, which is used by Truffle, and we have the to-do application, which is the base template for that you would want to start like mangling to make your app. And then of course the Truffle.js is the configuration file for Truffle. So if you wanted to edit your development versus production configs for deploying and stuff, you do that here. So the first thing you would do would be get a test RPC client running. So you'd run Emerald Test RPC, and what that does under the hood is it uses a tool that we have called Sputnik VM Dev, which is just a very thin layer on top of Sputnik VM that is the minimum amount with no P2P to run a test RPC. The other tool we have is Emerald Wallet, so you would run that next, and it would pop open the wallet, and you would use the keys there for the wallet, basically. So while you're in this directory, first thing you should probably do is npm install, and then the next thing you do is Emerald Deploy, which will deploy the contracts in your contract directory over to the Emerald Test RPC. And then next thing you do is just run npm start, and then you basically get an app that looks like this, which is just a basic to-do list. It's backed by a smart contract, so so how you would interact with that is as soon as you click send transaction there, what it does is the Emerald wallet has a custom protocol handler that this button calls, and then what it does is it prompts you like, hey, it's gonna try to open Emerald wallet, are you sure you want to do that? And then so yeah, like how it does that is, like I said before, it's a custom protocol handler, and we're following an Ethereum improvement protocol, one of the first ones for doing a custom protocol handler. There's a couple of them. Yeah, so there's a couple EIPs for dealing with custom URLs to send transactions. and Emerald Wallet just implements most of that original Ethereum improvement protocol. So yeah, once you click the link, it will open in Emerald Wallet with the parameters that you defined in the URL. So on this one, the method to be called here is add to do, and the to do text is say hello world. And then this lets you review and also sign, like have your password here so that you can sign and send your transaction. So once you sign and send it, it's not pictured here, but I pictured it yesterday. It would show the transaction details page on whether it's success or failure or whatever. And then if you went back and looked at the to-do list, it would look like this with your new to-do there. And the same flow would happen if I click on the checkbox here. It would go back. It would be a different parameter up here. So it would be like toggle to do at index, and then it would have your index. And same with the X button on the side there. So basically all interactions are going to end up going through the wallet so that you can sign it properly, and you know, if there's any payable functions, then you'll be able to pay your Ethereum Classic through that. Yeah, so that's you getting the starter kit up and running. And I don't have a lot more to show here because I don't have my slides or anything like that, so I'll start taking questions.
You can crack open the GitHub.
Show a little bit of what app.js is like. So like, the idea is like starter kit is the template app, and then all this command line is just sort of trying to bring a bunch of tools together into one place, rather than it being like a hodgepodge of different tools, and like a lot more to remember. And it also gives us a place to start like adding stuff in. So like Emerald New right now is fairly primitive. Same with like deploy and really all of those, because you're like just getting this stuff started, but it should form the skeleton for like, you know, that sort of Rails experience, Rails app generating sort of experience, right? Like sometime soon we'll get around to adding a lot more stuff for generators as well. But I thought we'd put it.
Okay, so I'll show some of the code so that you can see how we are interacting with the chain. Okay, so here's so we have a component called transaction URI, and what it does, it takes like an ABI and a bunch of the parameters you'd need to make a transaction. And what it does is it basically formats that into a transaction URI using React's render props. So you get that right here, and then you can compose any component inside with that. So right here, I'm just on click, I'm calling window location href go to that transaction URI, which then pops the wallet open because it handles the custom protocol. And yeah, and so the toggle checkbox looks the same, except that it calls it with a different method, which is toggle to do at index, which matches up with the contract method, like the Solidity contract method.
What about the app bar?
Yeah, so I can show you how. Let me show you the app bar. What I'm talking about with the app bar here. So the app bar is the nav bar at the top. Consists of like a network selector, like a block number, the balance for your current account, and then the account selector. So the code for that looks like this. Has the network selector there, current block number, ETC balance, and the account selector. And those, inside of those, they use the same kind of components that I'm using here. Instead of making a transaction URI, it fetches stuff off of the chain. Yeah. Yeah, so I can show you how it renders out the lists of to-dos. So I'm using this contract React component. It's also a render prop. So everything that we're using is going to give you a render prop, which just means that inside of the component, the children are a function. And so for example here, I'm returning 3 items. They just happen to be text, complete, and deleted. So this is interacting directly with the Emerald test RPC. Or in production case, it would be Ethereum Classic mainnet. So the params you'd need are like what the contract address is, what the ABI is, the method that you're calling. So this one is like get to do with what index you have it on, and then it'll just render it right out for you. That's a bit going deep into the code, but yeah. So
all of these components are inside of a other Emerald library called Emerald JS UI. Maybe I'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so if I had my slides here, I would have a great slide on Emerald JS UI on how everything is broken up into either presentational components or fetching components. So presentation would be like the block number, you pass in 1 and it renders 1. But that's like you don't want 1 hard-coded, so you're going to fetch the block number from the chain. And those are a different set of components that are only fetching. So we don't want to combine the two because it obviously makes things a lot less composable. And say you fetch an account one place and you need it like another place that's not directly down the tree, you're going to have a lot of problems there. So we like to keep them separate and let you compose them yourself, basically. Yeah, so any questions so far?
How familiar are you guys with React? Anyone? Anyone used React before? No?
Yeah.
The question, how much code do you need to write to display all this? Block numbers and everything.
Yeah, so
Does it work magically, or
Yes, it does.
you need to write a logic?
So I was going to explain something that was newly added to React fairly recently. Well, first of all, put your hand up if you have no idea what React is. Okay, so React is it's like I wouldn't call it a framework per se, but it's a front end tool for basically defining UI and then passing parameters through the UI and deciding when to render the actual page, right? So the whole premise of React is you get this component API, and so I'm creating a React component and I give it some properties. Whenever those properties change, it's going to re-render my React component. Like that's the very, very like 10,000 foot view of things. But they fairly recently added some new APIs around like this thing called React contexts, and that's sort of where all of this like magical stuff lives. So like if you go back to the code there,
No,
Oh.
it's gone.
Okay. Well, anyway, there was the app bar example. So like this. It's like this is the person's address. So like that would be the account that you're interacting with this application using, right? So if I were to click this, I'd get a drop down that shows you your list of accounts. And when you select a new account, the balance would update. But then if you look at the code that you're actually writing for it, it's just like app bar, and then you say, I want a network selector. And like that's it. There's no props to pass around. And so it's using this context API to basically like set an account at this higher level. So like we have this concept of providers in React. And the providers are exactly what they sound like. They like, consume, basically, provide a value for context consumers. So basically what it means, like for the network selector, for example, we have a provider that provides the network URL to the rest of the app. And then if you want to say have, I guess like all of this stuff is relative to the network. So like balance, whenever the network changes, say like when I click, local, I get a drop down and like say I pick gas tracker instead. Internally, that's gonna like tell the provider to change the URL. And then the rest of the app is like listening to that provider and be like, what's the URL that I should be talking to for JSON RPC? So whenever that URL changes, that'll force this guy to re-render. And whenever this guy renders, it's going to go fetch the current balance. But now the URL has changed, so it's going to talk to the different network to do so. So like, it wouldn't change if you're going from one mainnet to another, like to another mainnet RPC provider. But if you're say running like test RPC locally, it would, right? Like you could, that's basically it. So it's kind of hard to explain if you're not like super familiar with front-end development, but that's kind of like what I guess the point of the starter kit is in a lot of ways, is like maybe you're not so familiar with front-end development, but you should be able to just follow those steps and get it running at least. And then everything's in that one file to start with, pretty much. App.js, right? So you can go in there and start poking around and like figure out how all of this stuff works, and like kind of let it be your playground to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, the big idea there is like you should be able to look at anything in that app.js file, like copy it around, and you're like, oh, I wonder if I can just change method from get to do's to like get to like one to do or whatever, right? Like it, and it'll just work. So we're hoping that people just start playing around with it and just building cool stuff with it. Yeah.
The reg is optional or mandatory? Or if reg is optional, do you have any way?
Yeah, so the React components are all of the stuff like all of the wallet, the Explorer, all that kind of stuff to run the networks and stuff doesn't require you to know anything about React or use React to build that front-end application. We do have all of the React components use our Emerald JS library, which uses plain JS. So if you didn't want to use React, then there's one layer lower that you can use. And what that provides is an interface to the Ethereum like test RPC, as well as the Emerald Vault, and the Vault just stores all of your private keys like offline. For example, like if you're gonna build an app that say uses some remote node, you don't want that remote node to be creating keys or anything, right? You want to do that in Emerald Vault, which just stores keys on their machine. So yeah, the Emerald JS will give you all the interfaces you need to be able to build this stuff. But the Emerald JS UI is all built on React, and that gives you like a lot of this interface stuff for free, basically. So yeah, it's just one more layer up to give you the UI on top of Emerald JS. Yeah.
It's very like many
also,
layers, right? Like
yeah, you can also use Emerald JS inside of Node.js if you were making an application without an interface at all.
I'm not sure I understood the context API. Is this like just a way to not pass the data?
Exactly, yeah.
Also, it's kind of like a global store, like
exactly, yeah.
It's like not necessarily global though. So it's you basically got it. It's a more or less a utility so that people don't have to continuously pass down parameters. It's not like it's global in the sense that so I create a context and then I create a context provider, which is going to be the thing that's like providing the value or a value, right? And then you want to consume the value, so you make a context consumer, and you put the consumer inside of the provider, and it basically looks up the tree and will get the value from the nearest neighbor provider, basically. So like it's global if you wrap your whole app in a provider,
So you can have multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it can be many layers deep, like down your application. That's the key point there. And there was an older React context API where you had to define the context on each component, but that is now deprecated in favor of, they're now like real components that you use, like very declarative component instead of an implicit like API.
It lets you, it's like this, UI kit that we're using called Material UI, it's React Material UI. They're using context to provide the theme. So like what it lets you do is using that you can customize anything, any styles you want from any of the UI kit's components. Like sort of at the top level, and then all of the components inside of your app will just like look like that now, and you don't have to pass down styles. It's mostly as a like you could do all of this stuff pretty much without context, but it becomes like a matter like you just have to write a ton of code, right?
Yeah, and we're using it very sparingly. And only for things that we know is going to be global to the app so that we can provide it for you. For example, like what network you're on and what account is currently like selected. So we're trying not to use context like too crazy because we like the idea of like React components being very like declarative and just knowing that that the code that you're seeing in front of you is actually the code that's running. Because there's a lot of ways, especially in React, to get lost on like either like implicitly passing stuff down or just passing a million parameters around. So then you have to go to like using destructuring and all these things so that you like it just makes the code like you can't follow the code when it's like that. Yeah, so we're trying to use it very sparingly, and that's why we started using a lot of the render prop stuff that I showed earlier. You can look up that pattern a bit later, but we're pretty ham on render props. We really like the declarative instead of implicit API that it provides.
Yeah, there's like a lot of ideas around things you could do, but the stuff is, like I said, like quite new. It's like the front end world hasn't really centered around like, yeah, this is the best way to, you know, like build a like top level provider that will be like your whole API kind of thing. Like we have like the JSON RPC or like, well, okay, and
Yeah, some people have replaced like all of Redux with like a global context if you want. It's just like you could literally build all of Redux with the context if you're going to follow the actions and reducer kind of pattern, but it doesn't force you into that pattern, which is good. So yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there.
like,
Any
I
more
think
questions?
The key takeaway though should be like the React stuff, like the Emerald JS UI stuff, is like more or less meant to be copy and pastable. So like you should be able to go to this code and just like copy it, slap it in yours, go to the imports, copy the imports, put it in, and it should just work, right? No matter how you sort of structured your app or whatever, it should just work, right? But yeah, like you know, as we were mentioning before, all of that stuff is just, so like all of the data fetching components, those are really just like one-to-one mappings to what we already have in Emerald JS. It's just like we want to, like, it's just if you want to use a React style interface for fetching data, go ahead, right? If you prefer to write like the promise code or like use async await or whatever to fetch the data and deal with it, like that would be like a more typical of like, you know, pre 6 months ago way of doing things, I guess.
I think some of the context for why the guys built this is we want to make Dapps development on ETC really accessible, you know, and pass some best practices that these guys have learned along the way of just trying to figure shit out on their own. You know, you're not, this is a good way to get started, but then you're not like completely forced into anything. Just how do you get started quickly? This is one way. I wanted to ask a question of everybody. Where are you guys in your journey of Dapps development? Like, are you currently writing smart contracts, deploying to chains, have a production Dapps at all? Or are you just learning?
I downloaded Emerald and hit all the problems that they talked about yesterday. And on top of that, I messed up the database when I opened it, and so I kind of quit in 2 days.
So
This is much easier though.
yeah, like I highly encourage you, no matter what level of knowledge you have of React or front end development or Solidity or whatever, to just go to those docs, follow them, and you'll have yourself an environment for like really easy learning. Like I don't know about you, but I learn best by like being able to mess around with stuff and then like see what happens, right? And that sort of spikes, like piques your curiosity and be like, oh, like what's that thing? How does that work? And then, you know, you go and ask the internet questions that are more specific, and in doing so, you get fairly good answers, right? Yeah.
So could you use something like Passport.js with the Emerald Vault if you had a multi-user environment?
Well, Passport.js like is the, you mean like that's the Express
Yeah, it's like
middleware for like
Yeah,
logging
you
in.
could definitely hook that up as like a custom middleware for Passport for sure. Maybe I'll do that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit weird to provide that. Like we already have the JSON RPC API to hit that, but I think it would be weird to provide. Actually, I think I think at least 1 or 2 exchanges right now use Emerald JS kind of like that, where they're making like, you know, hundreds of accounts, and you know, maybe using Passport.js would be a good way to provide an API for that. But we do have a JSON RPC API, so
Yeah, so
if you wanted to like maybe attach it to some particular user, like an exchange would or whatever, then you could definitely do that. And it's all offline, so it doesn't require like hitting the chain or anything like that. You could probably like it's really fast compared to like making accounts with Geth and stuff.
Yeah. So you just use Emerald.js. Emerald.js has inside of it ETH RPC provider and a Vault RPC provider. So those are like your two top level sort of APIs. So any function in Vault can be accessed through Emerald.js by creating a configured Vault RPC provider, meaning I've just like new Vault provider, and I give it the URL for where the RPC is for Vault. So Vault also has an RPC server, which I guess probably should have mentioned first, which you can expose however you like. But yeah, that's basically how Emerald.js would talk to Vault, is through RPC as well. And so yeah, you could like say inside of Passport, like on the client side, say maybe the user like signs a message, right? And then in Passport.js, you verify the signed message to make sure that they own that address or whatever. And then you're like, hey, you're logged in as that address. So like, yeah, you totally could do that. Yeah. Cool. And then
So how would you guys test this to the web? Like you have this button that pops up the lecture window for sending transaction.
Mm-hmm.
How do you mock? I'm guessing you have to mock this app.
It's a good question.
So Truffle, to test the smart contracts, you can use Truffle's test framework. But for testing that interface, that's why we don't have that mocked out. But if you're using like a test RPC, then like I would argue that like you should like let it pull up the wallet. But yeah, like you could set it up so that something else intercepts that custom protocol handler and
So yeah, Chrome also can you can register a custom protocol handler inside of Chrome, for example, or basically any browser. So theoretically, like I think what you're talking about is like browser testing, right? So like you're booting up a virtual browser.
I don't know. I was guessing that maybe it has some events, so that you could maybe mock the events and do karma testing. But
they're very
if
loosely
it's
coupled.
something like Selenium, it's fine.
So like the to-do app is really just polling get to-dos. There's no like messaging in between wallet and the app.
yeah, it's just pulling everything off of chain.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like clicking the URL just opens up the wallet with params. So if you're gonna test that with Selenium or whatever, you could just test that a window location change happened inside of the browser or something like that.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that with Selenium I'd actually have ability to click the electron app.
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah, so
So-
it would block.
So we'll say with like Selenium, whatever browser you're using with Selenium, the browser itself can register a custom protocol handler. So you could create a stub that will, or like a mock protocol handler.
So protocol handler launches the.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay.
So like he was mentioning, that there's a EIP for specifying a transaction as a URL. And the point here is like, okay, we're using Emerald Wallet for this, but like theoretically you could use any wallet that supports these transaction URLs. Because like, like any wallet could decide to implement support for handling those links. And then in which case this would work for, say, if you click it and like, I don't know, opens any wallet, it then provides that. It should work as well. And it's like, point there being is like, we don't want to say like
walk everyone. Like this, the only way this works is if you use Emerald Wallet. Like currently, that's probably the only way it works. But if like I just don't really know of any.
Yeah,
wallets that,
I think Mist implements part of that custom protocol handler, but I'm not sure exactly how much of it, so I'm not going to guarantee that it'll work with Mist, but I know that they're looking into supporting that custom protocol handler too. Igor,
That's
you
a
got
good
a question?
Yeah, maybe missing something.
Yeah.
So didn't get it. Do I need MetaMask to use
You
it?
don't need MetaMask. You just use Emerald Wallet. Yeah, so yeah, I could go on about MetaMask, but
I mean, you
I'll
could
keep that to myself.
you could replace the like. So we're using the like generate a transaction URL and just open it. That's what we're doing. If you wanted to, you could rip that out and like use injected Web3 or whatever, and then use MetaMask.
Yeah.
But like, I personally, I'm sure
Well,
Shane too. Like, I don't know. It's,
I know that MetaMask, they're coming out with like wallet.metamask.com, and so in theory, MetaMask could implement the URLs and have wallet.metamask.org intercept those custom handlers. So you could technically make that all work in the browser, and that might be maybe something we work on in the future, is having like a wallet browser, so you don't need the Electron wallet. So that would be a good flow with no downloading, the same way that MetaMask would. But so we're like 90% there, and just gotta unwrap Electron basically.
I don't know. Do you want to store your private keys in the browser plugin? I don't.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, right? It's like
I
I like that I'm downloading the wallet to my machine, and then that it's not gonna be like leaked anywhere, and it's not like I don't have to worry about my Chrome browser having any vulnerabilities in it. So
like we were saying, hopefully more wallets implement this transaction URL so that like when you're building a dApp, you don't have to say step 1 download MetaMask. It's just like if you have an Ethereum wallet on your computer, like this should just work, right?
Some of the what would we call them, requirements? I mean, you guys mentioned yesterday you've taken an opinionated approach to this to apply some best practices, and some of those best practices are around upholding some of the fundamentals of ETC, especially around security and but also ease of use. Right, just make it really easy to just get started without opening up security holes, without storing keys in browsers, stuff like that.
yeah,
So
and like how many times do you lost your MetaMask keys cleaning your browser? Like I lost too many CryptoKitties from that. Zach too, he's pretty hurt about it.
Some Gen Zeros, man.
Yeah.
No,
Cody.
Yeah, so how resource intensive is all this? Like if I have a really shitty laptop, am I going to be able to run it all there, or should I?
Yeah, I mean, Electron
Do I
is
wanna, like,
mildly compute intensive, but I don't think it's any worse than like Mist or something like that. So I don't think we're making anything worse here.
like current, we got a bunch of code on master for wallet that improves the performance of it quite a lot as well, but we just haven't made a release for it yet. Just like preparing for all these presentations and stuff. Like, haven't really had any time to like really do a good smoke test on it, make sure we haven't regressed anything and all that. So
But yeah,
I'm not going to tell you that it's going to run incredibly well on your like Atom processor or whatever. But, it should be reasonably.
yeah, and with the next release, it should be considerably more performant. It'll make a lot less HTTP calls and RPC calls and stuff, so it should help out there.
And this is the first time that anybody's seen this stuff, so we'd love to get people just using it and take some feedback from the community.
So I can run the Emerald wallet somewhere else and just point the RPC at it.
Yeah,
good.
exactly. Yeah, it boots the vault with it. You can also run the vault like separately too if you want. But yeah,
If you're running a private network, you have like one computer in your house that doesn't have access to the internet, but the other computer in your house has access to that one. You could totally just route the request through to your other computer's wallet. So it's
proxy it through.
it's more so it's less so the wallet, but more so the vault, right? You could run the vault on a different computer. The wallet is a little bit.
Yeah.
You could run the wallet different
Designer,
computer.
I guess.
Run the proxy for, I think it runs in 1920, and then you could boot another wallet. It would point the vault at the other computer or whatever. So yeah, that would work pretty good, I think.
Protocol handler stuff would work.
It would all work. We just send the vault RPC commands to the other computer via proxy. Alright. Any more questions before I finish up?
Actually, I'm lazy, so I wondering about do you have any document support including your start kits? So I don't want to install anything, just copy it and just test it.
No, but I will do that today. And post it. Shouldn't take very long. You just need you could from node 8.11 and then just copy in the stuff from the docs and it will work. Actually, inside of Docker, no, because you need the wallet running. Right?
Yeah, like you could make it work with Docker, it's just a bit more effort. So that might be something you're looking to next is, that's something Zach's really been into lately is like, can I run all of these inside of Docker so that we can get an even faster setup process. So that's definitely something we're looking into.
So looking at stuff like
Docker and Kubernetes and stuff like that. It'd be cool to run all of this stuff inside of that for sure. There's like some very interesting things you can do around Docker and booting GUIs and stuff. Yeah. Okay, I think
not so much for run call.
I think we'll wrap up here then.
Yeah.